Welcome back to my channel for a short Fuji versus Leica episode. This is something I've not done very often on my channel, but from time to time I like to compare cameras. And this is the Fuji X100VI. This camera just came to market, is beautiful, still rare, and a lot of people actually have their names on waiting lists. And this is my Leica Q3, which is one of my most favorite cameras at all times. I really love this camera. I shoot this camera. I have it with me on travel. And I think since these are both compact cameras, it's actually time to provide the 5 major differences of these cameras. So I will not talk about what's the fastest electronic shutter speed on the Leica Q3 versus the Fuji X100VI. I will really focus on the 5 major differences. Let's kick off the video. The first major difference between these two cameras is form and size. And really, they could be brothers from a different mother, but this is clearly the smaller brother. Because if you look at that, this is truly compact. The lens is not coming out that much of the camera body. By the way, the difference between these type of compact cameras and a system camera is that you cannot change the lens. Here on the Fuji camera, we have a firmly mounted 23mm lens, but since the sensor here in that camera has an APS-C format, you need to apply a crop factor of 1.5, and then you come to a full frame equivalent focal length of exactly 35mm. Here on the Leica Q3, we have a firmly mounted Summilux lens, 28mm. It's a fantastic lens. I always say on my channel, and there are lots of videos you can look up for the Leica Q3, the lens alone is very likely worth the price tag you pay for that camera. And firmly mounted. It looks like a system camera, but you cannot replace the lens by some other focal length lens. And that is the big difference between compact cameras and system cameras. So from a form and size perspective, these cameras are totally different. And this one here fits easily into the pocket of your jacket because the lens is not coming out that much of the camera body. Whereas with a Leica Q3, good luck if you want to get this into the pocket of your coat. It will either ruin your coat, or maybe you have a very large giant pocket. But I have a hard time imagining that this goes into a pocket of a jacket, and you very likely have it with a shoulder strap around your neck, or you have it in your camera bag. And that's the way to carry the Leica Q3. This one here, totally non-intrusive, very small, very compact, easy to carry around, in particular ideal for street photography, or if you take photos in neighborhoods and areas where you don't really want to catch attention with a super expensive camera, then this is your companion. This will be with you at all times for that one shot you're looking for. And by the way, before I go to my major difference number 2, there is one other eye-catching difference here. Namely, here you see the viewfinder at the front side of the camera. That's not the case for the Leica Q3. And why is that? Because the viewfinder of the Fuji X100VI is a hybrid viewfinder. On the Leica Q3, we have an EVF, so an electronic viewfinder, high resolution, very good in terms of quality, easy to operate. Here you have a hybrid viewfinder. That means you can switch in the camera whether this is operating as an electronic viewfinder or as an optical viewfinder, which in the same way as in Leica rangefinder cameras gives you an enhanced field of view where you can actually see beyond the true area of the photo as it will later be taken by the camera. And that is a big advantage. A lot of people like that because optical viewfinder, in particular for Leica rangefinder shooters, is a big thing. That is something a lot of people like. And here you can easily and conveniently switch between electronic viewfinder and optical viewfinder, which is something you cannot do on the Leica Q3. This is EVF only. And of course you recognize this if you look at the cameras on the front side, because here you see the viewfinder. Clearly an optical viewfinder needs to look through the camera body, and you don't have that feature here on the Leica Q3. Major difference between these two cameras, number 2, is sensor size and resolution. And I've posted many videos on the Leica Q3 on my channel, including 3 fully fledged tutorials. I will post these videos down below in the info box so you can look them up. And the Leica Q3 has a so-called full frame sensor. That means it corresponds to the dimensions of a classical film roll, 36 x 24mm. And it also has a very high dynamic range. And I've intensely looked into the dynamic range and also what Leica calls the triple resolution technology, where you actually have different resolutions also in the DNG file, which you can choose in the menu. And I will also post this video down below in the info box because there are some interesting observations to share. And if you have not seen that video and if you are interested in the Leica Q3, this might be some interesting weekend video for you on YouTube. The Fuji, in contrast, has not a full frame sensor, but a smaller sensor in an APS-C dimension. And that's still a large sensor compared to what you have in your smartphone, but it is also significantly smaller than what you have in a full frame, or if you want to go that far, in a medium format sensor camera. And the resolution here is different. So the resolution on the Fuji has 40 megapixel, give or take, whereas on the Leica Q3 we have 60 megapixels. So the Leica has 50% more resolution. Now 40 megapixel is plenty enough. I think you can crop into these images easily and still get good image quality. I'm going to show that later on because I will also show some sample images of the Fuji, not of the Leica, because for the Leica you find many videos on my channel where you can look into image quality. This camera has not made it yet to my channel, so I need to provide some images to give you some impressions. So we have different resolution, 50% more here, different sensor size, smaller sensor, full frame sensor, and the dynamic range on both cameras is really good. Both cameras can shoot easily at night in low light and will provide excellent image quality. Fuji, of course, also gave the sensor and, by the way, the processor built into the X100VI a name. And the sensor is called an X-Trans CMOS 5 sensor and the processor is an X-Processor 5. And that's the newest generation, the newest technology Fuji offers on these type of cameras. And I can tell you, based on experience with Fuji cameras in the past, their X-Trans CMOS technology is absolutely brilliant. What you will get out of this camera is definitely top-notch quality. On the Leica side, we have very high dynamic range, as I mentioned, full frame sensor, and the processor here is the newest generation Maestro processors, which processes data coming from the sensor very, very fast, and in this way delivers a very smooth workflow. The third major difference I see between these two cameras here is how robust they are built and weather sealing. And unfortunately, and that's for me a big minus, the Fuji X100VI is not weather sealed. You need to purchase additional accessories, namely a filter for instance, and then it will become weather sealed. Whereas the Leica Q3 natively out of the box is weather sealed according to the IP52 standard. And also if you look at the two cameras, I think in hand, the Leica Q3 feels a bit more solid, a bit more rugged and robust. Whereas this one here is a bit more filigrane, it looks a bit more vulnerable, but as I know from people who have shot this camera, and in particular the predecessor, the Mark V, for a long time, it is in fact more robust than it looks like. But the weather sealing is a big disadvantage. Here you need to purchase additional accessories before you get it. And here you have a clearly defined industry norm IP52, which will make this camera robust in nasty weather conditions, so you don't have to worry if it is raining or if you are shooting in an environment where you have more dust than usual. Major differences I see in my point number 4 in the features the cameras are equipped with. And let's quickly switch on the Fuji here to demonstrate what I'm talking about. Let's get the lens cap off. Let's switch this camera on. And here you have, for instance, video capabilities which are enhanced compared to what you had before, but not being a match for the Leica Q3. On the flip side of the coin, here we have a lot of features which are actually not included in the Leica Q3. So if I go here into drive mode, and in drive mode you see a lot of features coming up here. Let me try to get this a bit closer. So we have all kinds of bracketing here coming, ISO bracketing, white balance bracketing, exposure bracketing, HDR, multi-exposure additive, and so on, panorama shooting, all kinds of things. And then we have here the video mode. And if in the video mode I go into the menu, you will actually see that if I go to the movie mode here, I can shoot in 4K and I can go up to 6.2K, which is the largest resolution the camera offers. Whereas on the Leica Q3, I will show you in a moment, you can go higher. But generally, this camera nevertheless is more feature rich. So let's go back here into drive mode. Let's go into single shooting for photos, escaping the video mode. And if I go into the menu here and go here to the camera menu, you will find down here not only interval timer shooting, which is something is also embedded in the Leica Q3, but you find a lot of interesting features which are typically for Fuji cameras and which you will not find, at least not in the near future, in a Leica camera. So bracketing I mentioned, but we also have here, for instance, focus bracketing, which is something that's super useful for macro shooting. I'm considering to do a separate short video clip on that, demonstrating how it works and taking a nice macro photo with focus bracketing of that camera here. And in general, the features here are more rich, if you count them, than what you have in the Leica Q3. And that's not astonishing because Leica pays a lot of attention to a minimalistic appearance of their cameras. I will switch on the Leica Q3 in a moment in order to show you that. And as I said before, I don't want to talk about the nitty-gritty, so differences in base ISO and how far you can go in ISO and the fastest shutter speed and so on. That's not what I'm after. But in features, you get more in the Fuji, which is astonishing because the camera body is so much smaller. And what is really cool and really eye-catching and very useful if you shoot in low light is image stabilization. And image stabilization here in that camera is way superior to what you have in the Leica Q3, because here you have an OIS, so optical image stabilization in the lens. Here we have in-body image stabilization, because the sensor is kind of in a magnetic field, and this in-body image stabilization mechanism offers up to 6 f-stops of compensations that should actually enable you to shoot much longer exposures handhold than what's typically dictated by the rule of thumb if you look at 1 over focal length or 1 over 2 times focal length. So in terms of features, you actually get more in the smaller camera than what you have in the Leica Q3. Let's quickly look into the Leica Q3 to also show the other side. If I switch this on, get the lens cap off, let's have a look here. And let's go into the menu, and typically in drive mode you see what I'm talking about. If you go into drive mode here, you have single shooting, continuous shooting, then you have interval shooting, which is corresponding to the interval timer in the Fuji, so you can do nice time-lapse videos, and you have exposure bracketing. But for instance, you don't have focus bracketing. And that is something I typically appreciate, in particular if you get closer with your camera to the subject and this way get a very shallow depth of field. And then also depending on the aperture you have chosen, of course, you will need several frames to get more depth into the sharp areas of the image. And that's something you cannot do with Leica, besides all the other features I mentioned. So in terms of features, here is a clear winner. This camera is more minimalistic. And as I said, focus bracketing for macro shooters, but also in landscape, is a big plus, which you have on the Fuji and not on the Leica. In terms of video mode, let's also quickly go there. Let me swipe here into the video mode. If I now go into the menu, you find easily here, if I go to the video format and resolution, then you see here I can go up to 8K. So again, we have a higher resolution sensor here, so it's easier to go up to 8K. Here we have 40 megapixel and 6.2K is the maximum resolution you can video shoot on this camera here. So differences in features, I don't mind, you know, and it's very hard to say what is the better optionality you have. We'll come back to this when I wrap up the video in the conclusions. But one thing is clear, here you have a winner in terms of richness of features. Here you have a more minimalistic and larger camera lens combination. By the way, in terms of features, both cameras have subject tracking in continuous shooting mode, and that works very well on the Leica Q3. I also tried it out on the Fuji, works in the same way as a charm. You have the very well-known and famous filters on the Fuji camera, and that comes from the good old film roll times, where Fuji provided a lot of different flavors in terms of the appearance of an image. If you shoot with film, you can electronically get them simulated here. Here you have the so-called Leica looks. I spoke about that in various videos on my channel. And here these two cameras are kind of at par. And then there is one more feature which I want to quickly point out, namely here in the Fuji we have a built-in neutral density filter, and that again is an enhancement of features which you can use, for instance, to get silky smooth water if you're taking photos on a river or a lake. I think that's it in terms of features what I wanted to say. My last major difference between these two cameras actually is the price tag, and that's a big difference. Because I just looked it up at B&H in the US. The Fuji comes for $1,600. As I said, you will need your name to be dropped on a waiting list. The Leica Q3 at B&H is priced at close to $6,000. So that's a multiple of 3.75 between the Fuji and the Leica. And if you need to watch your budget and you want to have a more compact, feature-rich camera, then the Fuji clearly is the one you should choose, because $6,000 for a camera where you cannot even replace and change the lens for many people is a no-go. Here it's much easier. You have to think a little less if you spend $1,600 compared to $6,000. So now coming to the end of the video, let me quickly wrap up. Which of these cameras is for which type of shooter? And that's a hard one. And I don't want to prefer one or the other camera here, because as you saw in the course of the video, they are really very, very different. And what really unites them is, as I said, two brothers from a different mother, is that they are both compact cameras. You will have to live with one and only lens. You will not be able to replace that. But in all other aspects, these cameras are totally different. And if you are a jacket pocket camera shooter, then this is the camera you should choose, in particular in street or reportage. You will never catch attention with that camera. No one will even notice that you take photos. Different story with the Leica Q3. It's actually as big as many system cameras. Like for instance, if you mount an appropriate lens, it's comparable to a Sony a7R Mark V. And you nevertheless have only one focal length at your disposal, although there are digital zoom functionalities built into that camera lens combination. And you also have, if you want to have a lower resolution, as I said before, the triple resolution sensor technology here. But this clearly is a more intrusive camera, is bigger. You will not get it hidden in the pocket of your jacket. In terms of image quality, I must say these cameras are both very, very good. And I will show a few sample images in a moment, which I shot when walking through the beautiful city of Zug in Switzerland. Nothing special, just walking around with family and taking here and there a picture, but to get a first flavor what this camera is capable of. On the Leica Q3, as I said, you will find many sample images in various videos on my channel. Look them up if you have appetite to see them. And this is clearly an absolutely professional camera. This camera is not distinguishable a lot from, for instance, the Pro line, the new Leica SL3, except that you cannot exchange lenses here. But it is a fully fledged professional camera, which you can easily use in professional shootings, whatever the mandate is you get from your client. Before concluding the video, let's spend a couple of minutes on these sample images I've just shown in that very brief slideshow before. And I just want to point out a couple of things. It won't take long. So first of all, if I look at the first image here, this is really good image quality. This was shot at an f8.0 ISO 200, 1/35 seconds. And you see this image is pinpoint sharp. But it's not only about sharpness, it's also the micro contrast this lens on the Fuji sensor delivers here. And I like a lot what I'm seeing. I think in general these images are all pretty much usable. The city of Zug is on a beautiful lake, the Lake Zug of course, and you always have these nice waterfronts here. And again, you see a lot of things going on. This camera is ideal for street photography. No one will pay attention to you taking photos. You will have all the time in the world to take your photos. It's non-intrusive, it's small, compact. People don't think that if you take photos with that camera, you will do anything with it. And that's why I think it's an ideal camera for reportage photography and street. And if you look here, I also like the colors coming from that lens sensor combination. Fuji has great color science in the same way as Hasselblad and Leica. And here, by the way, is more a close-up shot here. So that was shot at f2.0, widest open. The lens has a widest open aperture of f2.0, ISO 250, 1/1500 seconds. And this looks really good, and the background blurriness is beautiful. It's very smooth, And don't think just because you're shooting a small camera, you cannot nicely separate the foreground, in this case the flower here, from the background and get a very smooth background bokeh. That works very well, in particular if you get close with the camera to your subject, and the minimum focusing distance of that camera is actually done in a way that you get very close to your subject. So that's nice. I like that. Again, street photography here, just capturing the scene. Look at that nice little child here. Very nice. And by the way, the old city of Zug is beautiful. If you ever come to Switzerland, don't miss a walk through the old part of town in Zug. It's very nice. Here, someone on a bicycle having a break with a banana. I like that image. Continuing here, what else do we have? Here again, the waterfront, in the background, some industrial buildings. Level of detail of this camera is terrific. Here an image of a tree where I managed to get the full tree into the frame, and I should confess or admit, at least tell you, that 35mm for street is not so much my focal length. I like much more the 28mm, and there's a big difference which I personally feel when I'm going to Zurich downtown testing cameras. If I take a 35mm lens, where I'm typically walking, the top of the church towers is cut off. The 28mm lens will capture the full frame and the church towers will no longer be cut off. So that 7mm really make a difference when you talk about 35mm full frame equivalent on the Fuji compared to 28mm full frame field of view on the Leica Q3. And here the tree is fully in the frame, but on other occasions it's cutting off a little bit of the top of the subject in front of me. Nice houses again, by the way, and some art here in the foreground. Let's continue. Waterfront again. Waterfront. It was just starting that the flowers come out because the weather was getting better in Switzerland. Here another close-up shot, and if I crop in here by 100%, you again see not only a very high level of sharpness and details, you also see very nice micro contrast. And that clearly is something people will appreciate shooting that small little Fuji camera. Here is another building in Zug. I think that looks good. Distortion seems to be quite well under control. Lightroom also is recognizing the Fuji X100VI already for the usual optical corrections. That's nice. Again, I took this image to show you the level of detail you get here on that commercial pillar here with all the posters stick to it. And here these old alleys in the city. Very nice. People are walking up and down, enjoying their time. Again here, a nice pedestrian zone in the inner part of the city of Zug. And so on and so on. I don't think I want to spend more time on that. Maybe here quickly. Again, you see a huge level of detail, but also here, if you look at that nice micro contrast. So this is a very capable camera lens combo where the lens is firmly mounted on the camera body. You cannot replace it, as I mentioned before. You have to live with the 23mm on APS-C, which corresponds to 35mm on a full frame sensor in terms of field of view. And then last but not least, I did a panorama shot. So this is a very high resolution here, 17,577 pixel in horizontal dimension and almost 8,000 in vertical dimension. And I was stitching together here about 7 or 8 frames. And that of course gives you again a huge amount of detail, and you can print this in very large dimensions if you want. That's basically all I wanted to say to the image quality. Let's now wrap up the video. And let's come to conclusions here. Alright, that's all I wanted to say and show. Both cameras will have their fans and, you know, their community. And if you are a Fuji shooter and for instance you have the medium format GFX100 Mark II, this is a perfect complementary supplement to your equipment. It will not take a lot of space in your camera bag and you always have a spare camera with you. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you liked it, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy. And of course, peace out.